Hey, happy Holy Week. What? You mean Easter's coming up? Yeah, I know. You wouldn't have known because you've been busy with I'm not sure what. But good news, the media did announce that Easter is canceled, which then caused us to look back up at the calendar and realize, whoa, that's sneaking up on us. The good news is then that caused us as a church to respond in what I believe overall was a great way, and that is Easter has never been about dressing up fancy and going to a church service, but it's always been about celebrating the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But what I want to do is I want to share a devotional that happened prior to that event in our history, and that is when Jesus gathered with his disciples and he washed their feet. Jesus, and I'm going to go real quick for the sake of time, but Jesus washes the disciples' feet and gets to the last one, and that's Peter. And Peter says, "You're not going to wash my feet." And I believe there was more dialogue than we actually see in the Bible. By the way, just in case you're wondering, I'm in John chapter 13. And Simon's like, Peter's like, "You're not washing my feet." And I believe Jesus was like, "Yeah, I'm washing your feet. Come here." And he probably even reached out at one time, and maybe Peter pulled away and says, "Look, you're not washing my feet. You will never wash my feet." And then Jesus says to Peter, "If I don't wash your feet, then you will have no part with me." Well, that's a big deal to Peter, and Peter says, "Fine, don't just wash my feet, wash all of me. Wash my hands, wash my head, wash my whole body." And Jesus says, "You know what? There's actually no need for me to do that because there's a greater lesson that he wanted to teach his disciples at this time." And so now you go back to the table and they're lounging, and I love this part. It says that he was reclined at the table again with his disciples. That's my kind of ministry right there. And he asks them a question. He says, "Do you know what I have done?" And that's a key question in this whole thing because it wasn't just about washing their feet and making them clean. But it was about showing them the posture of what it is to follow Christ, and that is to be a servant. You see, Jesus was being an example of servitude. And I choose this word servitude because this actually means to posture yourself as a slave or as a servant. And so here's Jesus in verse 13. It says, "You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right in doing so." You're right. I am of high stature. But I also want to show you what it is to be a servant of Christ and what we're going to be calling you, what I'm going to be calling you to. And that is a life of servitude. And so then he explains to them, it says, if I then the Lord and the teacher wash your feet, you also ought to wash the feet of one another. You see, it wasn't the master who washed the feet of people when they came into the house. It was the servant. And Jesus humbled himself and washed their feet. And so this reminds me of another passage of Scripture in Luke chapter 6, where he actually talks about loving your enemy. You see, I think what's going on here is Jesus isn't asking the people to go out there and love when it's easy to love. Do an example or be an example of ministry in the easy ways, but to go and serve those that are hard to serve. You see, it's easy to welcome people in that want to hear the gospel, but it's hard to go after kids when they're constantly blowing you off. It's easy to love a victim of somebody that maybe has a spouse that cheats on them, but it's hard to love the person that's cheating. It might be easy to love somebody whose household is a victim of pornography, but it's hard to love somebody who is addicted to pornography. You see where I'm going here, and this is where I believe Jesus was going with them. Is he's saying, you know what, I want you to serve, but I want you to serve even when it's hard. And so I think what he's saying is, don't just do the things that are easy to do, but do the things that are hard to do. And that's what you're called to. So happy Easter, and I hope this blesses you. For me, this isn't so much an encouragement. The truth is, this is probably one of the hardest passages of Scripture that I've ever had to read in my life. I still struggle with it because it's just hard. Oh, and happy Easter. It's not canceled.